Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. We're here today in Kuwait on the occasion of the third annual Conference for Better Humanitarian Action. Many organizations from the private sector and the governmental sector have come here to share their experience and try to improve the effectiveness of relief action. Our guest today is someone whose job is to coordinate all these efforts, the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Valerie Amos. She's been in office for almost 2 years now. Mrs. Amos has had a long-standing commitment to development, especially on the African continent. She was Secretary of State for International Development in the British government. She's been active for over 30 years on the promotion of human rights. Now we're in the Arab world where during the last 2 years we've seen many brutal political changes and distressed situations. Valerie Amos, thank you very much for joining the show today. I would like to start the interview with the situation in Syria. A month ago you visited Syria. You've seen different parties from within the government and from humanitarian organizations. Since then, the situation has even gone worse. The government's escalating use of helicopters and fighter jets in civilian areas makes it more difficult now to access people who need assistance there. What is your analysis of the conflict now, of the situation in Syria, and how optimistic are you about the political process?
Well, I'm very worried about the situation. When I went, I had been in March, and at that time we estimated that about 1 million Syrians needed our help and our support. When I went this time, the government themselves were saying that over 1 million Syrians were displaced. This does not include the Syrians who are staying with friends and family, and of course the figure that we use is about 2.5 million Syrians affected by the conflict. So it's not just those who have been displaced, it's about people who have lost their job or are working less because the economy is now in trouble. It's about the fact that some people, because of rising food prices, are not able to buy the food that their families need. Some people who work in sectors that require transport are not able to continue to work because fuel is scarce, and of course there are a lot of people who are just affected by the fighting. And we have over 250,000 people who are registered as having left as refugees, but the number is much higher than that. We know that some kind of political solution is what Syria needs. It needs the international humanitarian community, it needs the Syrian government, it needs the opposition to come up with a proposal which is accepted by the Syrian people and which leads to stability and security. But as we haven't got that, our job on the humanitarian side is to try and get help to as many Syrians as we can, and it's getting more difficult because of security constraints by the day. But I'm proud that we have managed to do quite a lot. In July, we managed to get food, the World Food Programme, through its partners, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent and local NGOs, got food to over 800,000 people. We've managed to get health supplies, we've managed to get things like tents that people need once they have left their homes, kitchen supplies to people, but it's not nearly enough when you're looking at the numbers who are in need.
What are the main things that Syrian people need today?
First of all, they need protection from that violence. Then those who have had to flee need support, they need places to stay, they need shelter, they need security, they need to have access to food, water, sanitation. I was very distressed when I saw some of the conditions that people are living in schools on the outskirts of Damascus, people who have fled from the violence. And that means that children who should now be looking at going to school, because the school year is about to start, will not be able to go to school because those schools are being used to house people who have fled. So there are very distressing situations. There are people who need health care. Syria is a country that produced its own medicines, much of its own medicines, in factories in Aleppo and elsewhere. Much of that has now stopped. So there is a chronic shortage of medicines, a chronic shortage of healthcare. Some hospitals and health facilities have been targeted, so they're no longer functioning. So there is a great need across the country.
How much money are we talking about? How much money do we need?
Well, we've just revised our appeal. In March, we had asked for about $180 million, and I was concerned that the money was coming in very slowly. We've now doubled our appeal because we're now talking about $2.5 million, 2.5 million people, so we need a lot more money. In addition, we have the refugee response, which is also costly because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people in neighbouring countries. Turkey is hosting a large number of refugees. The Turkish government have put considerable resources into that. You have Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq. These are all countries where refugees have fled across the border. And my colleague Antonio Guterres is already saying that he thinks that when he revises his plan at the end of this month, he will have to have a contingency figure of 650,000 refugees who might flee.
How accessible are these areas where Syrian people live in Syria and outside Syria? And have you seen obstacles either from the regime side or the opposition?
Very much depends, and it can change from day to day. The situation is not static at all. So you will have situations where people will move out of an area which is coming under bombardment, and if they can, they will move back as quickly as possible. In some towns and cities, you have sustained conflict, so people will leave for a very long time, and they're the ones who will either be in school, or they will have moved across the border as refugees, or they will have gone to friends and family. There are some parts of Syria that we are able to go to because we're working very closely with local partners. UNICEF, the UN Children's Charity, for example, is working with over 30 local partners. But there are other parts of the country that we cannot get to, and it may be because of security. It may be from something as basic as the person on a checkpoint doesn't recognize that you are bringing in humanitarian supplies and may be suspicious of you. And then, of course, there are places that we cannot go because the fighting is so intense that it's difficult even for humanitarian workers to get there.
What would you like to say to countries that are said to provide military support to one of the other side? I'm thinking of Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, maybe other countries.
It's a situation that has to be resolved through diplomacy, through discussion, through bringing people to the table, making them recognize that it is ordinary people who are suffering as a result of this. And I don't think that providing arms or engaging in this militarily, either from the opposition or from the government, is the solution.
Are you planning another trip to Syria in the near future?
Well, I will, of course, return when I think that my visit can have an impact and where my visit can really make a difference. What I'm doing right now is making sure that what I saw when I was last there, the concerns that I continue to have, that I make sure that the member states of the United Nations understand that concerns. I will, of course, work with the special representative because I think that his role, particularly in engaging with the opposition and with the government and helping to secure that access that we're looking for, that also continues to be important.
Now I would like to speak about the situation in Yemen as well. Yemen is in a delicate period of transition to democracy. Now earlier this month in Riyadh, international donors pledged $6.4 billion to rebuild Yemen. Is money enough to support the reforms there?
Yemen is going through a transition. In the last year there was a lot of focus on the political process, and I think that people forgot that there was a humanitarian crisis unfolding in Yemen, which we have been seeking to work with the Yemeni government and with NGOs to really try to deal with that crisis. And that crisis takes several forms. You first of all have a food crisis where almost half of the population are in need of food. 5 million people in desperate need, we call it severe acute malnutrition. Over 10 million people facing difficulties with malnutrition. You have 1 million children who are malnourished, and stunting, reduced growth, is already a reality in Yemen for children under 5 as a result of malnutrition. You then also have, in the south and the north of the country, the impact of 2 different conflicts, which has led to the internal displacement of people. And you also have a refugee situation where you have refugees who have been coming into Yemen, even though the situation in the country itself is so difficult. So this is a complex emergency that we are having to deal with. I hope that some of the resources that have been pledged will go to meeting those humanitarian needs, but I think the critical thing is to link what we are doing on the humanitarian side with that longer-term commitment to development and reconstruction. This is what Yemen needs. It needs security, it needs stability, and it needs livelihood support.
And we'll have to leave it there. Valerie Amos, thank you very much for your insights and comments. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks to all of you for watching this edition of The Interview on France 24 from Kuwait. Stay with us for more news.